Montana Territory, 1881. The fire started just after midnight, and by sunrise they were dragging her out by the wrists. The barn behind the Walker homestead blazed like judgment, horses screaming inside until their throats burned out. Jane Jensen stood barefoot in the frost, nightgown soaked from a bucket she had tried to throw too late. Her knuckles were scraped raw, her hair tangled, eyes wide and red-rimmed. She did it. Someone spat. She always does. Sheriff Callan had not even asked a question before clapping irons on her wrists. Laura did not argue. No one ever listened when she did. She had been blamed when the schoolhouse roof collapsed in '78, though it was old timber and late snow. She had been blamed when the preacher's daughter ended up with child, though she had only sold her a bar of soap. She had been blamed when old Mrs. Danner's cow went missing, though it was found 2 days later, stuck in a ravine. Now the barn was gone, and they blamed her again. She sat in the jail cell for 2 days before anyone bothered to bring her a real meal. When the key turned late on the second night, she expected more shouting, another accusation. Instead, he walked in. He was tall, lean, with a layer of trail dust on his hat and boots. His eyes were steady, the color of moss after rain. His shirt was worn but clean, tucked into a belt that had seen better years. His voice was low and calm when he spoke. "My name's Vaughn Bellamy. I was passing through on my way to Helena, heard some talk in the saloon. Thought I'd ask you what really happened." Laura blinked hard. "You came to ask me," he nodded once. "That fire did not start from inside the barn. I saw it from the ridge when I was riding in. Flame came from the roof first. Someone poured something up top." "You were trying to put it out." She stared at him, unsure if her mind was playing tricks. "You believe me?" Vaughn looked at her through the bars. "I saw you trying to save the horses. That does not look like someone starting fires." Laura's voice cracked. "No one's ever asked me before." Vaughn did not say anything right away. He just looked at her with something careful in his eyes. Then he went to the sheriff. By morning she was free. He waited for her outside the jail, leaning against the post, arms crossed. She stepped out into the cold, her dress still wrinkled from sleeping upright. She hugged her arms around herself. "You got a place to go?" he asked. She laughed, bitter and short. "Not anymore. The Walkers only took me in after my father died. They were never fond of me." "Took every chance to remind me." Vaughn nodded. "Come with me then." She stared. "Why would you do that?" "Because I know what it is to be blamed for something you did not do, and because you look like someone who could use a fresh start." She hesitated, heart thudding. "Where are you going?" "Got a small ranch near the Bitterroot Valley. Just me, a few horses, and a lot of quiet. I could use some help. Someone who knows how to patch fences and keep a fire going." "I'm not looking for charity." "Good," he said. "I am not offering any." They left that afternoon. She rode behind him on his spare horse, hands tucked into her coat sleeves, wind cutting through her hair. He did not speak much, but when he did, it was never wasted. On the second day of riding, they stopped near a stream. Vaughn handed her a tin cup of coffee and sat beside her on a flat stone. "You do not talk much," she said. "I talk when it matters." She looked at him. "Why did you really come into town? You said you were passing through, but Helena's the other way." He smiled, small and quiet. "I heard men talking about you in the saloon the night before. Something about a cursed girl always messing things up. I wanted to see for myself." She shook her head. "And I saw a woman trying to save horses from a burning barn. That is all I needed to know." Something inside her shifted, not all at once, but just enough to let in a little warmth. They reached his ranch on the third day. It was not big, but it was clean and quiet. The mountains curved around the valley like arms, and the air smelled like pine and river stone. He showed her the spare room, the pantry, the barn, let her settle in without fuss. That night she stood on the porch, looking out at the stars. Vaughn came up beside her, hands in his pockets. "Thank you," she said, voice low. "You do not owe me thanks." "I do. You were the only one who asked me what really happened." He looked at her, his face unreadable in the dark. "Everyone deserves at least that much." She studied his profile. "You said you knew what it was like to be blamed." He nodded. "My brother died when we were boys, fell off a cliff trying to chase a calf. Folks said I should have stopped him, that I was too slow." "I was 12. Laura's throat closed. "I am sorry." You live with it long enough and you start to believe it yourself, until someone finally says that was not your fault. He looked at her then, and something passed between them, soft and real. She looked away first. "Well, you saved me from that town. Guess I owe you at least a few patched fences," he chuckled. Fair trade. The days passed quietly. She fixed up the chicken coop, helped with the horses, cooked simple meals. Vaughn never hovered, but always noticed. When her hands bled from splitting wood, he wrapped them in clean cloth. When the wind howled at night and she could not sleep, he brought her tea without asking. One morning, as she was hanging laundry, he came up behind her, holding a small wooden box. "I made something," he said, a little awkward. She opened it. Inside was a hairbrush carved from pine, her initials burned into the handle. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched it. "Why?" he shrugged. "You never had your own things." "Thought you should." She pressed her lips together, holding back tears. "No one's ever done something like this for me." He looked down. "Well, they should have." She reached out and touched his wrist, just a moment, but it was enough. That night she sat with him by the fire, knees drawn up, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "Vaughn?" "Yeah, do you think people can start over?" He looked at her, then gently reached over and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think you already have." And for the first time in a long time, Laura believed it. By late March, the snow in the Bitterroot foothills had thinned to patches, clinging in the shadows like stubborn ghosts. Laura stood in the orchard at the edge of Vaughn's land, sleeves rolled to her elbows, sorting through fallen branches and trimming back brittle limbs. The trees hadn't borne fruit in a while, but he said they used to, and she believed him. She could feel the potential in the soil, the quiet waiting. Vaughn came down from the ridge with a rifle slung across his back and a string of rabbits over one shoulder. His boots were caked in mud. He stopped just short of the nearest tree, watching her work. "You're pruning like you've done it 100 times. She rested her hands on the shears. "My father kept trees, peaches mostly. He used to say, you cut what's dead so the rest has room to live." Vaughn shifted the rabbits in his grip. "Smart man." She didn't answer. The sky had gone a clear, deep blue, and the wind carried the scent of thawing moss. She bent again, careful and deliberate, only stopping when her fingers started to ache from the cold. That evening she found him on the porch, shaping a new haft for an axe. His hands worked slow and sure, shaving soft curls of wood into a pile at his feet. "Where'd you learn to do that?" she asked, stepping up beside him. "Worked a logging camp near Missoula when I was younger. Tools got broken faster than they could be bought. You learn or you lose your job." She sat on the top step, arms wrapped loosely around her knees. "You ever think about leaving Montana?" He didn't look up. "I did once, got as far as Cheyenne. Thought I'd see more of the world, maybe head east, but I never could make peace with the noise. Out here, things make sense. You work, you eat, you rest, you rise. There's no pretending." "I used to want to go to San Francisco," she said. "I read a letter once from a man who'd been there, said the streets were so full of people you couldn't walk without touching someone." Vaughn paused in his carving. "You still want that?" "I don't know." She looked out into the dark. "I think I wanted to disappear, not be the girl everyone already decided about." He set down the axe handle. "You're not her here," she swallowed. "I'm not sure who I am here yet." He stood and leaned his shoulder against one of the porch posts. "You'll figure it out. No one's rushing you." She looked up at him then, her face lit by the lantern inside the window. "You always this patient?" "No," he said. "Just with you?" She looked away, something warm flickering low in her chest. The next morning he left early to check the west fence line. She stayed behind, washing linens and boiling water for the floors. Near midday, she heard hoofbeats too light for Vaughn's gelding. She stepped out, drying her hands on her apron. A woman dismounted, her skirt dusty from the trail, bonnet pulled low. "I'm looking for Vaughn Bellamy," the woman said, her voice sharp with purpose. Laura nodded slowly. "He's not in just now. Might I ask who's calling?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "My name's Dinah. I'm his sister." Laura's breath caught. "I didn't know he had family." Dinah looked her up and down. "He doesn't speak of us much. You're living here." "I'm helping with the place," Laura said carefully. Dinah stepped closer. "He sent money last year for our mother." "Then nothing. I had to come see if he was alive." "He's well," Laura said. "He'll be glad to see you." Dinah hesitated, something hard softening in her expression. He's always been stubborn, thought he could outrun things. Laura didn't answer. You care for him? Dinah asked, sudden and blunt. Laura felt her mouth go dry. I'm not sure what I am to him yet. Well, Dinah said, brushing her skirt, he was always the kind to notice what others didn't. Just don't run when he starts noticing you. She didn't stay long. By the time Vaughn rode in, the sun was low and the tracks Dinah had left were already half dried into the dirt. He looked at Laura, frowning. You all right? She nodded. Your sister came. He stilled. Dinah, she said, you hadn't written. She wanted to know if you were alive. He took off his hat, rubbing a hand through his hair. I meant to, I just didn't know what to say. She seemed to forgive that. He looked at her then, something vulnerable in his posture. You meet her long enough to know she doesn't do that easy. Laura wiped her hands on her skirt. She said something, that you notice what others don't. He gave a short laugh. I try. She told me not to run from it. His eyes met hers. Are you thinking about running? No, she said, voice steady. Not anymore. He stepped closer, slow, like she might spook. Then maybe we could start figuring out what you are to me. She let out a breath, not a laugh, not a sigh, just the release of something long held tight. All right, she said. We'll figure it out. And he smiled, not wide, not showy, but real. The kind of smile that said he'd wait as long as it took. By late April, the earth had softened enough to turn. Vaughn had harnessed his draft mare to the plow before sunrise, and Laura trailed behind, smoothing the furrow edges with a wide, toothed rake. The soil was darker this season, richer. She could feel it under her boots, the way it crumbled with promise. They worked in rhythm, neither speaking much. The quiet between them had changed. It didn't hold distance anymore. When the last of the east field was laid bare, Vaughn unhitched the mare and led her to the trough. Laura crouched near the fence, brushing earth from her palms. He looked over. You ever planted anything besides orchard? Parsnips, she said, and one stubborn row of beans that never took. You want to try again? She straightened, brushing her skirt. I do. Inside, the house smelled of dried sage and warmed flour. Laura spooned stew into 2 bowls while Vaughn stoked the fire with a new log he'd split that morning. The table between them had grown more lived in. A chipped cup Vaughn used for coffee, a folded shawl Laura stitched in the evenings, a tin box of nails they'd forgotten to return to the tool shed. He settled into his chair, rubbing a calloused thumb along the rim of his bowl. I was thinking about the barn. Laura looked up. What about it? I'd like to build a new one, bigger, with a proper hayloft. I figure it's time for more than just keeping things standing. She stirred her stew slowly. You mean to raise more stock, and maybe hire on someone come winter, make this something steadier. She set her spoon down. You've been thinking about all this on your own. I was waiting to know if you'd stay. She didn't answer right away. The fire popped and settled. Then she leaned forward, elbows on the table. I've been waiting to know if I was welcome to. His voice was low. You've been welcome since the day I handed you that coffee by the stream. Something in her eased. Then yes, I'll stay. Later, after the dishes were washed and the oil lamps trimmed, she found him on the front steps, rolling a smoke between his fingers without lighting it. She sat beside him, the porch boards cool beneath her. You never light those, she said. I did once. Gave it up after a lightning strike near the campfire. Smoke caught me right in the throat. She laughed, the sound sudden and full. You scared of fire? I respect it. Doesn't take much to lose what you've built. Her smile faded. I still dream about that barn, the horses, how fast it all went. He looked out toward the dark hills. The things that matter don't go up that easy. She turned to him, voice quieter. What does matter to you? He didn't look at her as he answered. That you feel safe here, that you don't have to explain yourself to be believed. When she reached out, her fingers brushed the back of his hand just enough. The next morning, they rode into town to buy seed. It was a long ride, coasting the edge of the river where the water ran high from melt and the rocks shone slick under the sun. Vaughn tied the horses outside the mercantile while Laura stepped in first, chin high, eyes steady. The room quieted when they entered. She felt it, the weight of old judgment still clinging to some faces. But now she didn't flinch. She stood beside Vaughn, sorting through packets of beans and squash, asking the shopkeep questions with her voice clear and settled. Outside, when the sacks were loaded, Vaughn nodded toward the saddlebag. "That ledger I bought, it's for keeping track of what we plant. I want you to write it." Laura paused. "You trust me with that?" "Of course I do." She ran her hand along the leather strap. "No one's ever asked me to keep record of anything." "Then it's about time." They rode home slow, the sun dipping low behind them. At the crest of the ridge, she pulled her horse to a stop and looked down at the valley, the barn ruins barely visible now behind new grass. She turned to him. "When you first saw me in that cell, what did you think?" He squinted against the light. "I thought you looked like someone who'd been holding her breath for years. And now I think you're breathing." She nodded once, just barely. "I am." And he reached for her reins, guiding both horses side by side, steady down the slope toward the house that stood waiting. The first calf was born just before dawn, slick and shivering in the straw. Laura found it while checking the pen, her lantern swinging low. She knelt beside the heifer, hands steady, voice quiet. The mother led her close, breathing heavy but calm. By the time Vaughn came around with the feed bucket, Laura had wrapped the calf in burlap and tucked it against its mother's side. He crouched beside her. "Didn't expect it this soon." "He's strong," she said, brushing damp curls from the calf's brow. "He'll hold." Vaughn watched her for a long moment, then reached for the bucket. "I'll bring warm mash for the cow." The morning stayed gray and close, clouds hanging low like wool. Laura worked by the shed, sorting through the last sacks of grain when she heard hoofbeats from the road. A boy arrived, no older than 12, his coat too big and fastened with mismatched buttons. He carried a folded note in one hand, breath hitching from the ride. "You're Mr. Bellamy?" he asked, eyes darting between them. Vaughn took the note, opened it slowly. The paper was creased and damp at the corners. He read it once, jaw tightening. "I'll go," he said, already turning toward the barn. Laura stepped forward. "What happened?" "A neighbor east of here. Died sudden. His wife's asking for help moving the cattle before the snow line rises. Says she can't manage alone." Laura nodded. "I'll pack food." He paused, surprised. "You're coming. You'll need another set of hands, and I know how to lead cattle." He didn't argue. They left within the hour, leading their horses along the narrow pass that skirted the river gorge. The air smelled of damp pine and iron-rich water. Laura rode ahead sometimes, scouting the trail, her braid tucked into the collar of her coat. At the widow's homestead, the wind had stripped the trees bare. A black ribbon hung from the porch post. The woman who met them had red-rimmed eyes and a rifle propped beside the door. She said little, only pointed to the back pasture and thanked them under her breath. They spent the better part of the day driving the animals up toward the safer ridge, where grass still clung to the hillsides. The cattle were restless, lowing against the wind. Laura moved through them with quiet firmness, tapping flanks, adjusting course with a whistle or a soft word. Near dusk, one calf broke from the group and bolted downslope. Vaughn swung from his saddle, but Laura was faster. She dropped her reins and ran on foot, slipping once on a patch of wet leaves before catching the calf by its halter and guiding it back up. He met her halfway, breath clouding the air between them. "You all right?" She nodded, cheeks flushed from the run. "Just winded." He reached out, brushing mud from her sleeve. "You didn't hesitate." "There wasn't time to." Her voice was low, steady. He would have fallen into the creek. They stood there a moment too long, the trees creaking overhead. Then he stepped back and led the calf the rest of the way up. That night, the widow offered them space in the hayloft. Laura lay wrapped in her bedroll, the scent of cut grass and horses filling the dark. Vaughn sat nearby, oil lamp casting a soft light on the rafters. "That boy," Laura said quietly, "the one who brought the note, he looked half-starved. His family's had a rough year. Father died last winter. Mother's working the bakery now." Laura turned on her side. "We could bring them some of the extra feed and flour. We have enough." He nodded slowly. "We will." She studied his face in the flickering light. "You've been carrying a lot alone." He didn't answer right away. "Then, it's easier than asking someone to carry it with me. You don't have to anymore." He looked over at her, meeting her eyes without hesitation. "I know." She reached across the space between them and rested her hand on his. You were the first person who saw the truth of me. He turned his palm upward, lacing their fingers together. You were never hard to see. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but inside the barn, the silence was warm and rooted. They returned home 3 days later, the trail muddier than before, but the sky clear. The calf born earlier was standing stronger, already budding at the fence rails. Laura smiled when she saw him. That evening, as Vaughn repaired a broken slat on the porch railing, Laura came out holding a folded square of fabric. "I made this," she said. "For the table, it's not much, but—" He took it, thumb brushing the simple embroidery at the edge. "It's ours now," he said. She leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder. "Yes, it is." And together they watched the last light sink behind the ridge, the wind carrying nothing but the scent of earth and the promise of things growing. The creek behind the barn ran faster now with meltwater, swollen and clear as blown glass. Vaughn strung a line between 2 cottonwoods, and Laura watched from the bank, a basket of damp linens at her feet. A pair of orioles flitted through the trees, quiet but present, stitching orange through the branches. "You fish much?" she asked, kneeling to rinse a kerchief in the shallows. "Only when I want to think," Vaughn said, tying off the line and testing its weight. "It gives a man something to do with his hands while his mind works out the rest." Laura wrung out the cloth, her palms red from the cold. "What are you working out?" He looked up, eyes catching hers across the water. "Whether to ask you something," her breath caught, but she kept her face steady. "Then go ahead." He stepped across the flat stones, slow and sure, until they stood close enough for her to feel the warmth rising from his skin. "I want to build a house further up the ridge, near that northern line where the light falls longest. A proper one-wood stove, deep porch, room to grow." She searched his face. "You'll need someone to fill it." "I was hoping you'd do that with me, not as help, not as a guest, as my wife." Laura didn't blink. She didn't need to. The answer had been growing in her like roots under thawed soil. "I will," she said. "Yes." Vaughn let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Then he leaned in and kissed her soft and certain, like a man who'd waited until the right time and now had nothing left to fear. They married by the riverbank the following week. The circuit preacher from over Pine Hollow came through on his spring route, and the service was short, quiet, and wrapped in birdsong. Dinah sent a quilt stitched with mountain shapes and pine trees, and the widow from the eastern ridge brought molasses bread and a small jar of wild honey. Laura wore a dress she'd mended from 3 others, the seams clean, the hem falling just right. Vaughn wore his Sunday shirt and a vest she'd pressed until it held a sharp crease down the front. Afterward, they shared stew and cornbread with the neighbors who'd come to witness, then sat on the porch steps while the sun dipped low. Laura rested her head on Vaughn's shoulder. "I used to think I'd never be allowed to belong anywhere. You don't need permission anymore," he said, his arm around her waist. "You're home." 3 months later, the frame of the new house stood tall against the ridge, the porch posts carved with notches where Laura marked each day's progress. She painted the shutters herself, a faded green that reminded her of the orchard leaves back in her father's grove. Vaughn cleared the field just beyond the front stoop, planting oats and clover for the horses. He built her a writing desk with a drawer that slid smooth as river stone, and she filled it with seed catalogs and folded letters from Dinah. One evening, as the wind carried the scent of cut hay through the open windows, Laura sat across from him at the table, their supper bowls scraped clean, the lamp flickering low. "I've been thinking," she said. "There's a girl down in the valley. Her mother passed last year. She's bright, maybe 12, could use someone to teach her letters." Vaughn looked up, setting down his fork. "You miss teaching?" "I never had the chance to start." "Then we'll make room. You can use the front room once the stove's in." She smiled, slow and full. "You always say yes." He stood and came to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand in his. "Only to you." That night she lay beside him in the cool linen sheets, the windows open to the sound of crickets and wind stirring the trees. His hand rested warm on her back, and she traced the lines of his collarbone with her fingertips. "I used to watch the sky and wonder if I'd ever stop running," she whispered. "You stopped," he said, pressing his mouth gently to her temple. You're here. A year passed, then another. Winters came with snow so deep they had to tie ropes between the house and the barn, but the stove never went cold. Summers brought thunderstorms that shook the rafters, but afterward, the fields always bloomed bright. Laura kept teaching. The girl from the valley came every Tuesday, then others followed. Vaughn built benches for them from leftover cedar, and Laura painted their names into the wood with a careful hand. They planted a peach tree near the porch. It didn't fruit that first year or the second. But on the third spring, it bloomed soft pink petals that caught the morning light like lace one morning. With the door open and the scent of biscuits rising from the hearth, Laura stood barefoot on the porch, hands resting on the small curve of her belly. Vaughn came up from the field, his shirt damp from work, and kissed her without a word. He didn't need to ask. He had known before she said anything. They named the baby Ruth after his mother. She had Laura's dark hair and Vaughn's quiet eyes. She grew up with dirt beneath her fingernails and books by her bedside, and she never once asked where she belonged because she always knew. And each evening, when the light stretched long over the ridge and the porch creaked beneath their rocking chairs, Vaughn and Laura sat side by side, hands entwined, hearts steady together. Always.